Good morning. So excited to be here and chat to you guys. I certainly had a fantastic day yesterday, and I feel like I've got rather big shoes to fill, getting us kicked off for today. But as you digest your morning coffee, definitely invite you to ask questions, challenge me, share your comments, your experience on the stuff that I'm talking about. Certainly don't want to just stand here and chat to you the whole time, and have definitely baked in sufficient time so that we can definitely stop and do that as we go. And if not, more than happy to take some questions at the end, and would really love this to be a discussion in general. So really excited to be here and chat to you guys. As I think about, kind of chatting to you today, one of the things I really wanted to kind of talk about is we're looking at all these vendors. We're chatting about all these challenges that we're all sharing. And so wanted to share a little bit about the journey that we at Bank of America have had, which we're still on. We certainly don't have a magic bullet. I don't have that for you today. So if that's what you came for, I apologize. I'm going to disappoint straight away. We definitely don't have all the answers and have some ways to go, but certainly are perhaps a little further along in our journey than some of you, and perhaps have some things that I can learn off some of you. So that's where I really encourage you to continue the dialogue, and hopefully today, as that coffee sinks in, I can just really start getting your brains going. I'm hoping by the end of it I can pause and hear the ticking as we start the session this morning. So before we do get started, as mentioned, I'm Lauren Saunders. I'm the head of Global Employment Brand and Recruitment Marketing for Bank of America, but I'd like to get to know who you are. I know as we get to a Friday on a conference, sometimes the room changes a little bit, and while I met some of you, I certainly haven't met you all. So just by quick show of hands, who have we got in the room that is a HR business partner or generalist? Anyone? Yep, a couple. Fantastic. Anyone in here who's doing employment brand and recruitment marketing? Great, most people. Anyone who is in talent acquisition or a recruiter? Excellent, except that was kind of a trick question, because you all should have put your hand up when I said recruitment marketing. And that's one of the first things we'll talk a little bit about today is how do we make sure that everyone who is in a role, particularly around the talent acquisition space, is really thinking about the job that they play as a marketer, and how we take the information we have about our companies, the good, the bad, and the ugly, as we've talked about with regards to storytelling, and really take that to market. So I'll share a few things that we've been working on to help our recruiters feel very empowered about that process. So just to kind of orient us for the next few minutes, I wanted to just briefly give you a chance to have a look at what we're thinking about so that you can get that brain ticking and hopefully start to think of your questions already. Moments that mattered. As we think about the market we're in today, as we think about the challenges we're all facing and this war for talent, as we like to call it, I think it's always really important to take a step back and consider what are the moments that brought us here. And certainly there are many. There are a lot, and certainly more than I can talk about in this slot this morning. But I'll share with you a couple of the key moments that I've seen, certainly over the last 10 years, and how they've changed the way that we think about recruitment marketing. The marketing mantra, what does that mean? Well, that means really activating your process and thinking in a very candidate-centric way. So we'll talk more about what that means and the application of that as we go ahead. What did Bank of America do as we activate all aspects of our processes attraction, as we make all of our recruiters marketeers? How have we done that? What's the mindset shift? And I'll share a little bit more about that. The new normal. For me, as we think of digital recruiting, we live in a digital world. That's, not a new statement or a new premise. The new world of recruiting is digital. And so there is now this foundational set of tools that every organisation truly should have in their arsenal, that if you don't have today are things, as you talk to the great vendors out in the exhibition hall, you're going to want to start to implement. And we'll talk a little bit about how we did that in a way that wasn't too disruptive to our business as usual activity. To get social, be strategic. I'll talk specifically about social media and how we've used that at Bank of America. We obviously, are at a social recruiting strategies conference, so be remiss not to give you some specific tips specific to that area. And I also have Aaron Galloway, who's my social media lead on our team at the bank here. So definitely feel free to ask questions. And as we get into the Q&A, I'd love to invite Aaron to kind of help with some of those questions and answers. And then last but not least, I'll give you a bit of a bag of tricks. So I'll share the guiding principles that myself and my team really focus on as we go through this journey that hopefully you guys can take back to your organizations and have as something really tangible that you can apply to the different journeys that you're on. Before we really kind of jump in to more properly introduce myself, aside from my love for high altitude hiking, which, you know, as you look at me today with my rather large high heels, is probably something that nobody would have guessed. So when I was asked for a fun fact, it was the first one that came to my mind. But I'm obviously an Australian, if you have not worked that out yet by the accent. I've worked for Bank of America for 10 years now, 4 here in the US, based in New York, and prior to that, I was over in the team in London. I also worked for Lehman Brothers in London, so I've spent most of my career in financial services and in the recruiting and diversity and inclusion space. Having said that, I'm mostly passionate just about the role that we all play as HR professionals and talent acquisition specialists and marketeers in really ensuring that we're part of people's lives as they make what is a really important transition, whether that's changing a career, moving up in their career, moving across in their career. This is actually a really meaningful moment, and I think we have a lot of influence that we can play in terms of educating people and supporting them to have that journey in a really fun and exciting way and make it a little less scary, because we all know that moment where you've tried to move jobs and it can be rather daunting. So what do we do to make that a great experience, not only for the candidate, but also for us as recruiters and professionals? We sit actually as a marketing function within Global Human Resources. So I don't know if that's similar to some of you in terms of your team structure, but we actually don't sit within the marketing organisation, which has its pros and cons, and happy to talk to some of that if any of you would like to get into that dialogue. But as we think of that effort, we have a small team of individuals who are subject matter experts, and we obviously partner with several vendors and agency teams to really support us to manage the end-to-end attraction efforts for the bank. Bank of America is more than 200,000 people strong at a global level, and we obviously recruit right across the spectrum of roles that are required to make the bank go. So really, you know, an exciting effort and a great company to be a part of. Our team manages everything from our digital channels, so websites, social media, programmatic advertising, all of the good stuff that you can imagine we have out online, to our in-person events and conferences. I'm sure many of you are part of that process as well. So we go to a number of great diversity conferences. We obviously have a lot of in-person activity, particularly for graduate recruitment and campus recruiting. So all of that is within our team's world, and we really have looked to connect the dots on that as best as we can and make sure we create an atmosphere by which the candidate journey is very much the essence of what we think of as we map out our activity on a day-to-day basis. So having done my disclaimer that I have no magic bullets, I'll kind of continue on and definitely share with you some different things. But people often assume that as a larger employer and a big company who is a household name, that perhaps we have it easy. And that's a bubble that I definitely have to burst. We share the same challenges that you all share, and then some ones that are unique to the concept of being a large company. We receive nearly 2 million applications annually. And we still have roles that we struggle to fill from a quality perspective. So we definitely have our own challenges that are unique to us. And I'd be remiss as well not to call out the concept of regulation and changes and compliance that we have as a large organisation. And as somebody who banks with Bank of America, that's amazing for me. As a customer and somebody who has my personal money in their hands, I love that they're so rigorous on risk and compliance. As somebody who works there in a rather creative space, that can get a little frustrating for us, and it can really create some new challenges and problems that we have to really work around. And I know some of you are in other regulated industries and hopefully can share my kind of commiserations around, you know, how tricky that can make it, particularly as we think about social media. But as we think of that and kind of the moments that mattered, I think back to the start and when I was earlier in my recruiting career, and those of you that have been in the industry for some time will agree that the changes we've seen over the last 10 years are significantly greater than those for the 10 years before it, if not the 30 years before that. And wanted to talk a little bit about kind of why I feel that is and some of the experience I've had related to that. We like to think of the old world as kind of having your cake and eating it too. Markets were hot, the candidates were lining up, and for every candidate that I spoke to, I had a line of 10 other candidates who were just as qualified, if not more qualified, to do that particular job. It was seen as, banking was seen as a really stable industry, an exciting industry, and highly lucrative for really starting your career. And then fast forward to 2018, 48% of global employers now say that talent shortages are their biggest concern. And I would say that Bank of America is in that 48%. And with that, what we mean is the world has changed. We are in a market where there are a number of factors affecting the behavior of talent that we're trying to recruit. And we're all doing the same thing. So as we all go out there together to market, how do we share that best practice and think through some of these things that influence today's world that we live in? And how do we make sure that we're helping each other to achieve some great results here? Because there's certainly still talent out there. But as I think of the kind of pieces that affected this, the first one that obviously goes without saying is the financial crisis. On a personal level, I was actually working for Lehman Brothers at the time when they went bankrupt. And that was a very interesting experience, I would say, to go through. We were literally working business as usual, hiring people, putting out offers, doing our day job one day, and then didn't even have a job ourselves the next. We really had no idea what was going on. We were completely blindsided by it. And so as I think about that through my own personal lens, but as well as the lens of how I've seen the global financial crisis really impact recruiting today, there's a couple of different layers to it. Globally, we obviously experienced unprecedented times. There was huge distrust that was created in big companies, corporations, but particularly banks. But the piece that I think sometimes goes a little bit forgotten is that it also was a moment of change in terms of the view of a whole generation. There was this entire bunch of kids who watched their parents who had worked their whole lives super hard and tirelessly for their whole lives, perhaps were even nearing retirement age, lose their pensions, their jobs, and everything that they'd worked for overnight. The concept of job stability didn't exist in the same way. People didn't trust it. Nobody believed it. So as we think about the impact that that has on the psyche of some of the job seekers we're meeting and seeing today, it's actually quite profound and I think sometimes goes unnoticed. And even more difficult to that, there was obviously a huge upheaval of talent that for many of us we were able to gratefully take advantage of, but obviously it took us some time as we moved through that recovery in terms of an uptick in actual hiring. The knock-on effect, of course, The knock-on effect of that, of course, was change in regulation and laws. And not only in the way that we do business directly as a result of the crises, but I think as we look at the last 10 years, the financial crisis definitely changed the way we pay people, the way we manage people, and the way we run our business, for starters. But in addition to that, there's also an aspect that's specific around changes in employment law and protections for minority groups. These things have been profound over the last 10 years, certainly not mutually exclusive or necessarily as a result of the financial crisis. But I think as you look at the two together and the way that laws impact the day-to-day work we do, in a fantastic way, there's been things like increase in minimum wages. There's been changes in protections for minorities, increased scrutiny around employment opportunity. And those things have really created a new normal for us in terms of how we look at talent and the way that we manage our assessment processes. Digital disruption, obviously, is one that is talked about all the time. This conference wouldn't exist without it. There are many kind of aspects to this in terms of changes, new tools, social media. We've got collaboration tools. We've got AI. There's machine learning. All of these buzzwords that are out there, and somehow there's this expectation on all of us as talent acquisition experts to know and understand how each one operates in the industry and how we should use it. So really, it's creating a challenge for us in terms of pushing us to do more and think of ways to leverage some of these great tools. But the other piece of this is, aside from its impact directly on the tools we use as a TA function, there's also the impact to the way we hire talent, the types of talent we're hiring. We're all now going after talent pools that we don't have as many people in those pools from a technical perspective, because the digital world has also changed the way we actually do our business. And I think the compilation of those things is really important. Generations reshaping the workplace, I touched on this just a little bit earlier, but there's a new expectation from employees and candidates in terms of what they think of us as employers. They're eager digital natives, and as we go and talk to people, you often hear the concept of millennials, and everyone's always kind of like, oh God, stop talking about millennials. But there's millennials, there's Generation Z, or centennials, whatever you'd like to call them, and they genuinely are changing the way we think of the definition between work and play. But the other end of the spectrum that I think is less talked about is the baby boomers, who are exiting the workplace at an absolutely unprecedented rate. At Bank of America, we have a wonderfully tenured team, a lot of people who are proud to work there and have worked there for some time, but we're really having to rethink the way we think about the future of work and the future of our workplace and the skills in that workplace. Because we have a lot of very talented, very knowledgeable people who work for us that are now exiting. And some of the teams that are underneath them, that are this next generation of millennials, aren't quite ready to take on that challenge. So what do we do about that? We're left with a huge gap and a bit of a shortage as we think of that piece. An exciting challenge, no doubt, and certainly an opportunity for many people to step up in their roles and be trained up, but definitely something that's to watch when you have a company at the size that we are. And so as we think about exactly what this means for all of us and all these challenges, there's certainly lots of other concepts and lots of other pieces that impact what we do. But despite lower current unemployment rate, the other piece that I think is really interesting is there's a lot of data from a job traffic and job site traffic perspective that suggests people are still eagerly searching for jobs. I think there were some really great stats shared yesterday specific to that. And so there's plenty of people out there. They're still open to moving. We just need to work out how do we capitalize on that and how do we all leverage that talent market and help them be mobile and nimble and move. So with that, what we've been working on is really moving the model to meet the market. And the concept here is that there are benefits of talent acquisition operating with a more marketing mindset. Historically, we've been really focused on an inside-out lens, as I like to call it, where the recruiters did their process, they kind of dragged the candidate along and hoped they stuck around for the ride. It doesn't work like that anymore. We now need to, instead of looking at the process and defining that process to suit ourselves, employing the technology that's then clunky and disconnected and doesn't really feel good for the candidate, quite frankly, or the recruiter. And then last of all, we're thinking of the candidate, which is this historical kind of model. We ultimately have to really change to be very candidate first. And so as we think of that, there's a couple of different ways to look at it. But when we think about the model of most of our businesses, and certainly Bank of America is no exception, we are laser focused on our customers. We are laser focused on our clients and our business. Why are we not doing that with our candidates? There's a huge opportunity here if we can really activate all of our processes marketing and have that candidate first mindset. How do we ensure that we're being very efficient right throughout the process? With the candidate-centric lens, we're kind of building and in some cases rebuilding exactly what our process is. It should be a facilitator. It should support the candidate right throughout their journey, but again, with a candidate-first lens. The technology, in my personal opinion, should be something that's kind of seen and not heard. It should be there in the background, operating, chugging away, doing what it's supposed to do, helping you all to be super efficient, helping the candidate to have that great journey, but you should be using it and not even knowing you're using it. It shouldn't be something that somebody's looking at and going, oh, this technology feels really good. We've set that standard because we've created these old, clunky, disconnected systems. But the opportunity for us as we think of the great technology that's coming into play and all of the new vendors coming into market is really to think about how do we connect that to the candidate journey. So I've talked a lot about kind of how we got here, the approach we took, and kind of the things that we're thinking about. But what does it mean in practice? And this is one of my favorite kind of slides or visuals that we have. What it means in practice is we have to activate every single aspect of the candidate journey. We can't leave one out. We can't have a candidate have a great experience for the first two and then fall off a cliff. You know, we used to have this model by which it was like employer brand and recruitment marketing did the attraction. You have the talent acquisition operations team that owned the application tracking system and onboarding and some of these nice functions and tools. And then the recruiters just recruited in a very heavily administrative way. You can't do that anymore. If all the dancers are not doing the same routine, the show's not very good. You know, it's an opportunity for us all to really kind of hold hands and become a really smooth relay team as we pass the candidate on. And through that, we have to really all take collective ownership for the candidate experience right throughout their journey. And so as we think about, you know, what that means, what we've been really focused on is looking at each aspect of this process, thinking of what are the tools that we have, what are the processes we have in place, and what does the candidate experience look like, first and foremost, related to all of those aspects. We definitely, when we did that assessment first, had huge glaring gaps. We still do. And we're trying to work on filling those, but we obviously have to be careful at how we pace ourselves. New technologies are coming on board. I loved the hype and hope session yesterday. It's really hard to navigate. There is so many different tech out there and new vendors. How do you know what's right for you? You know what's right for you because it fills a gap that you have when you look at this rainbow. It fills a need in the candidate experience and what you have to deliver. And that is the only way you should ever be confident taking on a technology. There's a lot of kind of sexy stuff out there, a lot of jazz hands and shiny objects that make it very easy to be like, oh, quick, let's implement this. If you do that, you will burn out so quickly because it's not only about your resources from a time and money perspective to implement these new tools and vendors. You also have to be incredibly thoughtful about the change management process you take your team through, both in terms of the talent acquisition team and also the change for your candidates. It can have a very disruptive impact if you put all this in play at once. So build out that strategy, focus first on the most foundational aspects that you need to fill your gaps, and then come back and keep layering on until you get to that desired state. And I can't tell you what your desired state should be because it needs to be very much unique to each of you. So this brought along a new normal, as I like to call it. And for me, the things I'm about to talk to you about are some of the tools that we've implemented as we've looked at this journey and filled some of those gaps. But they're things that, quite frankly, are very fundamental to the way candidates expect to experience our recruiting process these days. The first one of these is social, and I'll talk more specifically about this in just a moment. But before I do, I'd love to know from you guys, how many of you are currently using social for your recruiting strategy? Hands up. Awesome, almost everyone. How many of you are using just 1 or 2 channels for that? Kind of starting the party, excellent. How many of you are using 3 to 5 or more? Great. So actually we've got a lot of you who are very experienced in that space. And I'll talk a bit about this, but I don't know how you guys felt, but when you especially cross that threshold from 1 to 2 to 3 to 5, it's a huge jump. It's a lot of work. There's a lot of stuff that's out there, and it's very easy to fall into the trap of just being there and doing it, but not doing a great job. So we'll talk about how we really reassessed that and reignited our social presence as we kind of talk more into that slide. We're digital, and it's a kind of high-level statement, I know, but as we look at our portfolio, we really wanted to take all of the things we were doing and kind of bring it in together. And in doing that, we were able to consolidate our web properties. A year ago, we had 7 different websites and microsites across the bank for careers and recruiting. So as a candidate, as you do a Google search, can you find us? Not really. And if you do, are you in the right spot? Probably not. Really hard to tell where to be, what to do. So for us, it was really important also to consolidate as we looked at the candidate journey. How do we make sure we're consolidating, rebuilding, redesigning? We're currently in the process. We just redesigned our campus recruiting website and launched that just over 18 months ago. We're currently in the process of redesigning our lateral and experienced hire careers website, as well as our internal careers website for our employees. So a long journey and a huge amount of resources into that project, but absolutely critical to the experience when more than 80% of candidates are coming through your careers website, and most of them typically have to come there to actually make your application. So a really important part of connecting that journey and candidate experience. In addition to that, we went from manual posted job posting slots and all those good things that we used to do to programmatic media, pay-per-click, display advertising, etc., that could be done in a really automated way. We've also tried some new tools like chatbots. I know we talked a bit about that yesterday, something that can be a bit contentious, and I'd love to share more about that experience if anyone's interested in dappling. But we took on a pilot at the start of the year, and it's been really interesting just to try it and learn and see what we found out about both ourselves as well as our candidates and the experience. And then one that I'm really excited about is online webcast events. It seems really kind of old school, and people kind of think of the daggy WebEx where everyone's sitting around and it's very corporate, but we've really been trying a new process of doing very high-tech webcast events that are linked to some of our social feeds. They have a lot of really great widgets and features for users, and we've had a huge reception for that because it obviously allows us to reach a huge number of people without minimal resources from our team. And I think as we think of this digital space, that's what it's all about. How do you do more with less? How do you do more with not having to physically go present in each location where you want to recruit. And these online webcast events and some of these other tools have been fantastic at really helping us to have that physical connection. We're mobile. And it sounds like a really embarrassing thing to say out loud, that, in today's world, when we think of how much we use our phones and, we expect that everything's mobile. But the truth was our process wasn't. We had an application process that wasn't mobile. We had assessments that people couldn't do on their phones. Our website was responsive, but it was built 10 years ago. So as much as it was responsive, it wasn't designed mobile first. So the experience wasn't great. Really important for us was, and this was what we considered to be one of our most foundational pieces, how do we assess everything we do and really consistently look at that as an opportunity to improve the experience? Interestingly, as I think of this, the piece that we found most, kind of daunting and exciting as we embarked on this journey to be extra mobile was that many of the candidates, based on our data, visiting our careers website in particular, are still actually visiting with their PC versus a mobile or desktop. And I don't know if you guys are seeing the same, but obviously there's still some level of comfort, particularly when making your formal application, to kind of being online and having all of your documents there and ready. Having said that, over the last 6 months this year, we have seen a double in our numbers of people using mobile compared to the month-on-month view of last year. So as we see new tools like your Quicken mobile app and some more of these very important pieces of work that you do, like applying for a mortgage and things like that, as people get more familiar with those tools, I expect that this mobile piece will probably start to increase. I think we were all thinking that it would pop up dramatically over the last couple of years, and it really hasn't. But I do think this year we've seen a significant increase that I'm hoping will help to really drive the market. But now I've also seen that over the last 12 months, there have been a lot more vendors that are providing much better mobile services. Some of the vendors we worked with our ATS, et cetera, didn't actually have a great mobile experience to even offer us. And so as you assess vendors, it's also something, I absolutely implore you to think about, because not everyone is there yet. And some of that's being driven by the fact that candidates are still using their PC for applications, but we have to be ready for when the time comes, because it's definitely not far away. And we're automating. This one I think is really, exciting. Recruiting has historically been a very heavily administrative process, and you'll all know this more than anyone. The innovations and new tech that's out there in the market to source, assess, interview, candidates are just phenomenal now. It's just an absolute myriad. And not only does automation create significant efficiencies for you and your organization, but there's a huge opportunity for you to get a candidate in a seat faster, which is the underpinning of a great candidate experience. How can you make sure they don't feel that black hole? How do we make sure they feel like they're important to us and we're going to get them in as quickly as possible? This automation piece for us has just been absolutely incredible. We first rolled out the video interviews as an example for our graduate recruiting space, and they were able to recruit candidates 50% faster, and they also saved 50% of their budget, because they were able to not have people traveling all over the world to campus. So the kind of efficiencies that you can create from automating some of your simple processes and the fantastic vendors that are out there and available for you to use are something that absolutely should not be missed. One thing I wanted to just touch on here is that there's a lot of studies out there around AI, and I know that's kind of like a buzzword. People get terribly excited about it, but a lot of the studies also say nobody really knows what to do with it. And I think there's a lot of trepidation out there. As we've mentioned, that there's a lot of companies, a lot of vendors, but it's really tricky to navigate and know what's right. But I think if you're really looking at the full process and considering what are the gaps, what are your actual goals, and what are the things you need to do, you can absolutely have a clear strategy and implement tools, try them out, specifically seek to address your challenges. And by doing that, you're going to end up with a candidate process that feels very connected. That's important for the candidate, and that's going to get you better candidates long term. Focusing specifically on social media, and I think this is one we've obviously talked quite a bit about throughout the conference, but social media is no exception to an area that's just challenging to navigate. Like most digital platforms, it's incredibly costly and time-consuming. It can be very daunting, and it's very much tied to our brand reputation. So it's not something we can be flippant about in terms of getting out into market. Importantly to note here, though, it's something that we should be doing. mostly because 79% of job seekers are actually using social media as part of their job search, and 83% of job seekers research company reviews and ratings online. Really, really important place for us to stay. With the trend of declining traffic on traditional job boards, both social media sites as well as what I like to call social job boards, so your Glassdoor and LinkedIn, are continuing to see an uptick. People are excited about this social concept. And so as a bank, we were a rather early adopter of social channels for recruitment marketing, but I have to confess that, when we kind of got out there, we were doing it for the sake of doing it. We really didn't have a true strategy about how we went to market and weren't doing a great job of it. So one of the most powerful aspects of recruiting is social media, but unlike billboards and newspaper advertisements of yesteryear, we can actually track this. We've got data at our fingertips that helps us understand the demographics, know what to start doing, know what to stop doing, and really focus in on what we need to achieve. Some of the key things our experience of resetting this strategy really taught us that use that data to understand your demographics, target only those channels that meet those needs and that criteria for you. As Aaron likes to put it, which I think is the best way to say it, you don't wear the same outfit to every party. You don't go to a funeral in your gym gear. So why do we try and do that with social media? We need to really consider each channel, understand what we're using them for, and use them in a really wise way. Set clear KPIs for each based on their demographic. Have a clear content strategy that's tailored. Be consistent. If you decide to tweet 3 times a week, just always tweet 3 times a week. Anything else will look really unorganized. You don't have to be in it all the time. And most importantly, don't be afraid to stop doing something if it's not working. We had 3 Twitter handles for careers at Bank of America for our various brands, and we just consolidated them down to 1, and it was the best decision we ever made. We've now got the ability to make a really clear story and strategy. We didn't have that before. So like many of you, we're very early in our journey, but this was the most important thing for us. What is success? As we think, of our Twitter handle, likes and retweets for us are not the right measure. It's the thrill of a like, and it's rather exciting, and often our business are asking us about it. But at the end of the day, if somebody's not clicking through to our website and actually making a transaction with us and becoming a candidate, it's not helpful to our process. So really important that you're considering all of these aspects as you build out your social strategy and helping to refine that as you start to ignite it forward. So I've covered quite a bit of ground this morning and just kind of lots of bits and pieces that I'm hoping get your minds going, but wanted to really leave you with a couple of the principles that my team focuses on as we think of our overall strategy. First, and one that's rather exciting, is you can measure several times, but you can actually cut as many as you'd like. The times are changing. Be open to know when to stop or start something will be really serving you well. If you put something in market and it doesn't work, get rid of it. It's not worth your time. Focus on the things that are going to give you the best return. And with digital, you've got the ability to redo things, to optimize as you go. You can see the data as you're doing it and know what's working. Leads me beautifully to the next one. Data is absolutely your new best friend. The new world is fully tagged, and if you have anything out there that is digital that is not fully tagged, don't bother doing it, because that is absolutely the best way to see exactly what's happening. Focus on it, use it to track performance, show return on investment, justify a change in strategy, use it to better understand your audience, use it to better tailor your content strategy, do some storytelling and tell more about your company's brand. And last but certainly not least, one size doesn't fit all. So I've shared with you today some of the things that we have done that might not work for your company. That's okay. Find out what works for you and stick to that. One size doesn't fit all really goes for candidates. It goes for companies. It goes for your channels. Tailor your strategy to exactly what your needs and problem statements are. And don't be swayed by the jazz hands that are out there. Focus on the things that actually solve your problems as opposed to the things that look sexy and help you to be the cool kid in town. Certainly Bank of America, we resigned to the fact that we're not always the coolest kid in town, but when we do something, we like to do it really well. So as we think about our recruitment strategy, we definitely apply the same thing. And we're not out there trying to be Google. That's a false promise. We're not Google. We have to be really true to who we are. So having said all of that, ultimately, really, really exciting time for our industry. We should be excited and thrilled about what's to come. I think it's only going to get bigger, better, more challenging, but lots more great tools and things out there that should be able to help us as we take this journey. And as I said earlier, I think the role that we play as talent acquisition professionals and marketers in helping talent navigate this difficult space and this difficult time in their life is ultimately, very genuinely meaningful. It's a critical life moment, and we shouldn't take that opportunity for granted. So let's all put our heads together, think of some really great ideas, continue our networking, and hopefully we can, come up with some even better ideas as we get out of this conference. So with that, I might have 5 minutes for questions or so. Yeah?
Yeah, let's do it.
Great.
So first, before we do questions, did anybody learn something? Can we give her a big round of applause? Now that we got the blood flowing, anybody have questions for Lauren? Yes. John.
Thank you, Brian. Good morning, Lauren, and thank you for your talk. As a global employer brand leader, what has been your biggest challenge and biggest success in tying in all of your regions globally?
Great question. I'll start with the easy part, the challenges. And often it's just lack of knowledge or understanding. I'm fortunate as a global leader to have lived and worked overseas in multiple countries myself. And so that does give me a leg up and a little bit of an advantage in terms of always thinking with that global mindset. I think the most important thing as we think of this, though, is don't assume anything. So as we think about the challenges we've had, often it comes from a place of just lack of understanding. We've tried to potentially put things in market and, I've seen it and gone, wait, don't do that. That's not going to go so well. Or our local team has seen it and said, why were you trying to do that? So I think as we think about it, I read a piece the other day from Universum, which was really great on this actually, around the concepts that many companies, one of their biggest priorities as they go into 2018 was actually tailoring the brand and the EVP messaging to the local market. And I get why that's everyone's biggest priority, because it should be. Absolutely essential. As we think about successes, I think the thing that has been really great for us is we've been able to leverage each other as a team. We've definitely questioned each other, supported each other, and been able to make that work to the degree that we've had some great successes in EMEA or APAC in terms of local campaigns that we've been able to roll out. And then we've really thought about, oh, great, that worked really well. How do we bring that over here? How do we do different things? So we've been able to teach each other. I think people assume, because the majority of the teams here in the US, that we're kind of leading the way and pushing everything out. But actually sometimes, because the organization is a little smaller at a global level, sometimes our international locations are actually able to do things better and more quickly than we are. Yeah, pleasure.
Awesome. We have time for one more question. Question right here. All right. Excuse me. And please introduce yourself, Robin.
Hi there. Thanks again for your talk this morning. I wanted to ask specifically about what you guys are doing specifically with on social, some of the tools that you might be using that you found that are helpful outside of what you're doing organically.
Yep.
And then how you are thinking about social for your campus versus your experienced hires.
No, that's a great question. And I would say right now, Aaron, please add, but I would say our campus hires probably dominate most of our social presence right now. And we're actually trying to see how we can expand that a little bit more and be a little more inclusive from an employer branding perspective at an experienced hire level. We recognize, though, that most of our executives are really not using social media to search for their jobs. It tends to be much more by word of mouth. So we're trying to focus on what are the areas where we know and understand our candidates are in social, and then based on that, how do we check out our demographics? Historically, we've predominantly been on Twitter. That's, we were one of the first financial services Twitter handles, and certainly one of the larger ones even today. But that is, a limited platform. And so what we've really been looking at is how do we expand that out? We have found huge success. Recently, we just did a new campaign from a paid social perspective, and I definitely encourage you all to try that if you haven't done it. Obviously, doing paid social versus organic allows you to have very targeted approach in terms of the people you're reaching, and that just quadrupled, if not more, our numbers for the most part. So right now we're kind of dappling in all different places depending on what makes sense. The bank itself has a huge presence: Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Glassdoor. I mean, the list is endless, and so it a little bit depends on the program that we're running, the campaign, the conference, whatever it makes sense. But for us, mostly historically, it's been Twitter, and now we're spending a lot more time in Instagram and Facebook and others that have been really successful. And we're yet to try some of the paid strategies in LinkedIn, but I know there's some really great functionality with LinkedIn video and stuff that definitely we're eager to try and is on our roadmap. Sure. Great.